Hello, my puppets. I'm gonna read to you a story from Grimm's Fairy Tales called The Young Giant. A long time ago, a countryman had a son who was as big as a thumb and did not become any bigger during the several years and did not grow even one hair's breadth. It's a Tom Thumb! It's just going by the young giant because, well, I expect we'll find out. But they don't say it's Tom Thumb. It just follows the other Tom Thumb stories. So it could potentially be some other thumb-sized man. But let's continue. Once when the father was going out to plow, the little one said, "Father, I will go out with thee." "Thou wouldst go out with me?" said the father. "Stay here, and that would be of no use to me out there. Besides, thou mightst get lost." Then the thumbling began to cry, and for the sake of peace his father put him in his pocket and took him with him. When he was outside in the field, he took him out again and set him freshly upon the cut furrow, and while he was there, a great giant came over the hill. "Dost thou see that great monster?" said the father, for he wanted to frighten the little fellow and make him good. "He's coming to fetch thee." The giant, however, had scarcely taken 2 steps with his long legs before he was in the furrow. He took up the little thumbling carefully with 2 fingers and examined him, and without saying one word, went away with him, and his father stood by, but could not utter a sound for the terror, and he thought of nothing else but his child was lost, and that as long as he lived, he should never set eyes upon him again. The giant, however, carried him home and suckled him, and the thumbling grew, and became tall and strong after the manner of giants. And when 2 years had passed, that old giant took him into the forest, and wanted to try him, saying, "Pull up that stick for thyself." And then the boy was already so strong that he tore up a young tree out of the earth by its roots. But the giant thought, "We must do better than that," and took him back again and suckled him for 2 years longer. And when he tried him again, his strength had increased so much that he could tear an old tree right out of the ground, but it was still not enough for the giant. And so again he suckled him for 2 years. And when he then went with him to the forest and said, "Now tear up a proper stick for me," the boy took up the strongest oak from the earth so that it split and was nothing more than a mere trifle to him. "And now that will do," said the giant, "thou art perfect," and took him back to the field from whence he had brought him. The father was following the plow, and the young giant went up to him and said, "Does my father see what a fine man his son has grown into?" The farmer was alarmed and said, "No, thou art not my son. I do not want thee. Leave me." "Truly, I am your son. Allow me to do your work. I can plow as well as you, nay, better." No, thou art not my son, and thou canst not plow. Go away." Well, however, as he was afraid of this great man, he left hold of the plow and stepped back and stood at one side of the piece of land, and the youth took the plow and pressed it just with one hand. But his grasp was so strong that the plow went deep within the earth. The farmer could not bear to see that and called to him, "If thou art determined to plow, thou must not press so hard on it. That makes bad work." The youth, however, unharnessed the horses and drew the plow himself, saying, "Just go home, father, and bid mother make a large dish of food in the mealtime, because I will be ready to go over the whole field." And the farmer went home and ordered his wife to prepare the food. But the youth plowed the field, which was 2 acres large, quite alone, and then he harnessed himself to the harrow and harrowed the whole land using 2 harrows at once. And when he had done it, he went to the forest and pulled up 2 oak trees and laid them across his shoulders and hung 1 harrow on them behind and 1 before, and also 1 horse behind and before, and carried it all as if it had been a bundle of straw to his parents' house. When he entered the yard, his mother did not recognize him and said, "Who is this horrible tall man?" The farmer said, "That is our son. She said, "No, that cannot be our son. We never had such a tall one. Ours was just a wee little thing." She called out to him, "Go away, we do not want thee." And the youth was silent, but led the horses to the stable and gave them oats and hay and all they wanted. When he had done this, he went to the parlor and sat down on the bench and said, "Mother, now I should like something to eat. Will it soon be ready?" And she said, "Yes," and brought him two immense dishes full of food that would have been enough to satisfy herself and her husband for a week. The youth, however, ate the whole of it, and himself alone, asking if she had nothing more to set before him. "No," she replied, "that is all we have. But that was only a taste. I must have more." She did not dare to oppose him, and went to put a huge cauldron full of food on the fire, and when it was ready, carried it in. "At length come a few crumbs," he said, and ate all there was. But it was not sufficient to appease his hunger. Then he said, "Father, I see well that with thee I shall never have enough food. If thou wilt get me an iron staff, which is strong, and which I cannot break against my knees, I will go out into the world." The farmer was glad, and put 2 horses in his cart, and fetched from the smith a staff so large and so thick that 2 horses could only just bring it away. The youth laid it across his knees, and snap! Broke it in two down the middle like a bean stick, and threw it away. To the father he then harnessed. There we go. Words aren't my thing for today. But you know what? That's why I plan on having a big red book to go ahead and have red book adventures. And then we won't have problems with all of the words that I happen to stumble over. So the father then harnessed 4 horses and brought a bar which was so long and thick that 4 horses could only just drag it. The son snapped this also twain against his knee and threw it away. And the father said to his father, "This can be of no use to me. Thou must harness more horses and bring a stronger staff." So when he took it and broke it from bit to the top and also to the bottom, he says, "Father, I see you will not be able to procure me any such staff as I want, and I will remain no longer with thee." So away he went and gave out that he was a smith's apprentice. He arrived at a village wherein there lived a smith who was a greedy fellow, who never did kindness to anyone, but wanted everything for himself. The youth went to the smithy and said to him that if he indeed needed a journeyman. "Yes," the smith said, and looked at him and thought, "A strong fellow who will strike out well and earn his bread." So he asked, "How much wage dost thou want?" "I want none at all," he replied, "only every fortnight, when the other journeymen are paid, I will give thee 2 blows, and thou must bear them." The miser was heartily satisfied, and thought he would thus save much money. The next morning the strange journeyman was to begin to work, but when the master brought out the glowing bar, the youth struck his first blow, and the iron flew asunder, and the anvil sank deep into the earth, and that there was no bringing it out again. And the miser grew angry, and said, "Oh, but I can't make any use of thee. Thou strikest far too powerfully. What wilt thou have for that 1 blow?" And then he said, "Well, I'll only give thee a quite small blow. That's all." And he raised his foot and gave the miser such a kick that he flew over 4 loads of hay. And then he sought out the thickest iron bar in the smithy and took it for himself, and took it as a stick in his hand and went onwards. When he had walked for some time, he came to a small farm and asked the bailiff if he did not require a head servant. "Yes," said the bailiff, "I can make use of one. You look a strong fellow who can do something. How much for a year do you want as wages?" And again he replied that he wanted no wages at all, but that every year he would give him 3 blows, which he would spare. Well, the bailiff was satisfied, for he too was a covetous fellow, and the next morning all the servants were to go into the wood, and the others already up, but the head servant was still abed, when one of them called up to him, "Get up, it's time, we're going into the wood, and thou must go with us." "Ah," he said quite roughly and surly. "You may just go then. I shall be back again before any of you." And the other went to the bailiff and told him that the head man was still laying in bed and would not go into the wood with them. The bailiff said that they were to wake him again and tell them to harness the horses. The head man, however, said just as before, "Go there, and I shall be back again before any of you." And then he stayed in bed for another 2 hours longer. At length he arose from his feathers, but first he got himself 2 bushels of peas from the loft and made himself some broth with them, and ate at his leisure. And when that was done, he went and harnessed the horses and drove into the wood. Not so far from the wood was a ravine through which he had to pass. So first drove the horses on, and then stopped them and went behind the cart, took the trees and brushwood, and made a great barricade so that no horse could get through. When he was entering the wood, the others were just driving out of it, with their carts loaded and ready to go home. And then he said to them, "Drive on, and I will still be home before you do." He did not drive very far into the wood, but at once tore 2 of the very largest trees out of the earth and threw them on his cart, turned around, and when he came to the barricade, the others were still standing there, not able to get through. "Don't you see," he said, "that if you had stayed with me, you would have gotten home just as quickly, and would have had another hour's of sleep?" He now wanted to drive on, but his horses could not work their way through, so he unharnessed them and laid them on top of the cart, took the shafts in his own hand, and drew it over. And he did just this as easily as if they had been laden with feathers. And when it was over, he said to the others, "There, you see, I've gotten over quicker than you," and drove on, and the others had to stay where they were. In the yard, however, he took a tree in his hands and showed it to the bailiff and said, "Isn't that a fine bundle of wood?" And then he said to the bailiff's wife, "The servant is a good one. If he does sleep long, he's still home before the others." So he served the bailiff a year, and when that was over, the other servants were getting their wages, and he said it was time for him to have his too. The bailiff, however, was afraid of the blows that he was about to receive, and earnestly entreated him to excuse him from having them, for rather than that he himself would be head servant, and the youth should be bailiff. "No," he said, "I will not be bailiff. I'm a head servant, and will remain so, but I will administer that which we agreed on." The bailiff was willing to give him whatsoever he demanded, but it was of no use, and the head servant said no to everything. So the bailiff did not know what to do, and begged for a fortnight's delay, for he wanted to find some means to escape. The head servant consented to this delay. The bailiff summoned all of his clerks together, and they were to think the matter over and give him advice. The clerks pondered for a long time, but at last they said that no one was sure of his life with the head servant, for he could kill a man just as easily as a midge. And for that the bailiff ought to make him go into the well and clean it, and when he was down below, they would roll up one of the millstones which was lying there, and throw it onto his head, and then he would never return to see the light of day. The advice pleased the bailiff, and the head servant was quite willing to go down the well. So when he was standing down below at the bottom, they rolled the largest millstone, and thought they had broken his skull. But he cried, "Chase away those hands from the well. They're scratching up the sand up there, and throwing grains into my eyes so that I can't see." So the bailiff cried, "Shh, shh, 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 shh," and tried to pretend as though he were frightening away the hens. Then, when the head servant has finished his work, he climbed up and said, "Just look what a beautiful necktie I have on." And behold, it was the millstone which he was wearing around his neck. The head servant now wanted to take his reward, but the bailiff again begged for a fortnight's delay. The clerks met together and advised him to send the head servant on to the haunted mill to grind corn by night, for since then no man yet had ever returned in the morning alive. The proposal pleased the bailiff, and he called the head servant that very evening, and ordered him to take 8 bushels of corn to the mill, and grind it that night, for it was wanted. So the head servant went aloft, and put 2 bushels in his right pocket, and 2 on his left, and took 4 in a wallet, and half on his back, and half on his breast, and thus laden went to the haunted mill. The miller told him that he could grind there very well by day, but not by night, for the mill was haunted, and that up to the present time, whoever had gone into it at night had been found in the morning lying dead inside. He said, "I will manage it. Just you go away to bed." Then he went to the mill and poured out all of the corn. Well, about 11 o'clock, he went into the miller's room and sat down on the bench, and when he had sat there a while, the door suddenly opened, and a large table came in, and on that table wine and roasted meats placed themselves, and much good food besides, but everything came itself, for there was no one to carry it. And after this the chairs pushed themselves up, but no people came, until all at once he beheld fingers which handled knives and forks and laid food on the plates. But with this exception he saw nothing. As he was hungry and saw the food, he too placed himself at the table and ate with those who were eating, and enjoyed. And when he had had enough, and the others had quite emptied their dishes, he distinctly heard all the candles being suddenly snuffed out, and it was now pitch dark. He felt something like a box on the air, and then he said, "If anything of the kind comes again, I'll strike out and return." And when he had received a second box on the air, he too struck out, and so it continued the whole night. He took nothing without returning it, but repaid everything with interest, and did not lay about him in vain. At daybreak, however, everything ceased, and when the miller had gotten up, he wanted to go look after him, and wonder if he was still alive. Then the youth said, "I've eaten my fill and received some boxes on the air, but I've given some in return." And the miller rejoiced and said that the mill was now released from the spell, and wanted to give him much money as a reward. But he said, "Money I will not have, I have enough of it." And so he took his meal back, and went home to the old bailiff, and shown what he had done, having been told what to do, and he would now have the reward that they had agreed upon. When the bailiff heard that, he was seriously alarmed, and quite beside himself. He walked backwards and forwards in the room, and drops of perspiration ran down his forehead. He then opened the window to get some fresh air, but before he was aware, the head servant had given him such a kick that he flew through the window and into the air, so far that no one ever saw him again. And then said the head servant to the bailiff's wife, "If he does not come back, thou must take the other blow." And she cried, "No, no, I cannot bear it," and opened the other window because drops of perspiration were running down her forehead. And then he gave her such a kick that she too flew out, and as she was lighter, she went much higher than her husband. Her husband cried, "Do come to me," but she replied, "Thou come to me, I cannot come down to thee." And they hovered about in the air and could not reach each other. And whether or not they are still hovering about or not, I do not know, but the young giant took up his iron bar and went upon his way. So I guess it wasn't really just Tom Thumb after all. Just another person who was just thumb-sized. I can't believe his folks just turned him out like that, but, well, he was gonna starve, I suppose. And having found that haunted mill, there was plenty of food. So I don't know, there's just a whole bunch going on. But just to give him a boot right out the window? Come on, man. Just take your pay. But hey, you know, I liked how amusing and lighthearted it seemed to be. Not all of them get the happy ending as this one did, so I had a good time. And I hope that you did too.